Well, I was very hesitant both to wear this hat today and also to wear the red shirt. I was going to wear a purple shirt, which showed that we ended up somewhere in between, but I couldn't do it. As much as I like purple, I couldn't do it. And this is the last day for this white hat, at least until I do something different. And so I will retire it after this morning. So let's take a look at how this election turned and where we did really, really well, both in terms of results and in terms of diagnostics. Clearly, as everyone knows, the House went very Democratic and the Senate went significantly more Republican. But let's take a look at it. Let's take a look at what we thought about it, what we thought we could have done, and what actually happened. So if you go to the Senate map, we looked at whether or not the Republicans hold all of their then current seats. And they held Texas, which was close. They held Tennessee, which turned out not to be too close. There was the obvious Utah, Wyoming, Nebraska that held well, and the regular Wicker in Mississippi held really well, no problem. So that left two states that were Republican that were hanging in the balance. One in Nevada, where Heller was supposed to hold. He did not. Jackie Rosen took him by about 5%. The way it looks now, it has not been finally declared, but there's no way that Heller comes back out of this. He's 48,000 votes behind in a 900,000 vote total. I'm rounding off to the nearest 20,000, but it doesn't matter. I don't think there's any way that Heller pulls that back out, and by pull it back out I mean that the totals are added up. I'll have another comment about that in a minute. The second one is, and this is a really important one, and I've spent some time on this morning. The second one is whether Martha McSally takes over Snowflake's, Jeffy Snowflake, bent-nosed Snowflake, left-wing Republican, fake Republican rhino, whether or not Martha McSally could take over his seat. And it is very close. Right now there are 16,000 votes out of 1,000,007, okay? So I did some comparing now, and this is not apples to apples, but it's fairly close. I looked at all 15 counties. I looked at what the totals are. I looked at which counties are 100% in. I looked at which counties are still partially out. I estimated how many votes are still outstanding based upon the proportions between 16 and now, because there are in Arizona about 85% as many people voted in this election as it appears now, as did in 2016. And so I've interpolated, there we go with the word again, I've interpolated what the likely gains and subtractions are for the various counties. And the counties that are out, there are Apache, Gila, Maricopa, Pima, Pinal, I guess you call it, and Yuma, all have open precincts. And the way I look at it, when I totaled how many more ballots I expect out of each of those counties on the proportions, multiplied them by the percentages, the offset that has existed already in the counties, what looks to me like this race that is now 16,000 votes apart is going to get closer. There's no question. So the question then is, does it get closer and flip, or does it get closer and hold? And it's very close. If my calculations are accurate, and of course they are, he says to himself, it appears to me that Sinema will gain about 8,000 more votes against the 16,000. So she's going to get halfway closer to the goal. This is like the frog jumping halfway to the other wall. When does it get to the other wall? If it jumps and jumps and jumps? Well, the mathematician says never. The engineer says it's close enough. In this case, Sinema is not going to get, in my estimation, Sinema is not going to get close enough to take this election. So I see Arizona holding. I see Nevada clearly not holding. And then the other states that flipped, that we rather looked at flipping, the states that I thought that Heller would hold Nevada. It's close, but it's not. The states I thought would flip were, first of all, North Dakota, which did flip, and flipped by more than the 10-point margin I said it would, but not by much. So it's 10.9, which is pretty close. Missouri, which flipped by 6%, 6 points. Josh Hawley cleaned out on Claire, as it should have been. That was the second best opportunity. The third best opportunity was Florida, which it looks like Rick Scott is going to hold. I think there is, according to this, there are 43,000 votes difference between the two in 8.1 million. So it is 0.43% difference between them. I think Nelson's going to ask for a recall. It looks like it will hold. All the votes are in. Last night, the Palm Beach County was holding out, and it makes me nervous when a county says it's 97% turned in on the precincts, because then I think, well, out of that other precinct, what are they doing? How many thousand votes can they come up with in that other precinct? And so my little dark mind works on it. So West Virginia, and let's go to Indiana. Mike Braun beat Joe Donnelly, and No Mojo happened. It was pretty clear. It was by 170,000 votes. It's an 8.6 margin. That is a huge margin. That's the second largest Senate margin flip from a Democrat to a Republican, only behind North Dakota. And then, of course, Missouri is fairly clear. Florida is on the knife edge. And, of course, when you take a fairly popular, well-entrenched Democratic senator in an off year, on a midterm year, against a Republican president, and to have any shot at it at all is pretty amazing. And the fact that it may have flipped, probably flipped, is pretty surprising. So the ones that came close, Joe Manchin in West Virginia barely held by 3 points. That is Patrick Morrisey did a good job there. President Trump obviously helped as much as he could. We're only talking about less than 20,000 votes. So 10,000 votes flipped in that whole state would have changed the outcome. Think about this, folks. 10,000 votes that voted for Morrisey instead of Manchin would have changed that outcome. So sometimes we think about whether our votes count. This is clearly a situation where our votes count, and counted very large, and I'll show you some other ones. All right, so we've got the New Jersey one, which the corrupt Menendez held by 9 points. That's pretty crazy. Pennsylvania held pretty solidly for Casey. I didn't think we were going to flip that one by almost 13 points. Sherrod Brown, the incumbent in Ohio, held by 6 points. That was really close, and Jim Renacci came really close to that. I mean, it's 280,000, but it's a huge state, so that's close. Michigan, you know, I think if there was a place where I would have said Trump would have wisely used his time, he would have spent more time in Michigan, and John James just needed a tiny little boost. We're talking 250,000 votes out of 4 million. We're talking about a 5-point margin. A month ago, 6 weeks ago, when I looked at this, there was a 16-point margin, and John James has squeezed 2/3 of it out of it and almost took a deeply entrenched Democratic senator out of Michigan. So that was pretty good. Wisconsin went Democratic. Tammy Baldwin had no trouble with Leah Vukmir, and it looks like, I'll talk about it in a minute, it looks like Scott Walker's down too. And in Minnesota, obviously Amy Klobuchar won huge, 24 points, and but the alternate one was in the special election. Tina Smith held by half that much, almost 11 points, which was kind of disappointing. I thought that would be close. All right, which takes me back to the remaining contest that's outstanding. And this is the one about which I know lots. I have been steeped in this like like I've been soaked in vinegar. I'm a pickle, right? So it's Montana, and as of the end of last night, Matt Rosendale was ahead by 3,000. I thought, well, that sounds interesting. How close are we? Well, we had most of the votes in. I looked at how many more votes there were the last time Tester ran. Montana's not a state that's grown much. They were within 20, 30,000 votes. But, so I started looking at where are those votes hidden. And there were a few votes hidden in the red counties, maybe margins, that is, gaining margins for Rosendale. How many votes would he gain in those red counties that still had precincts out? And it was a few thousand, maybe 5,000. So he, if nothing else had been sticking out, he would have gained another 2 or 3 or 5,000, and he would have won by 5,000 or 6,000 votes. But the counties that were out, and this is where it becomes obvious, the counties that were out, Cascade had a few precincts out. Cascade is a Democratic county, always has been. My mother used to call the Great Falls Tribune the Johnson rag for LBJ because it couldn't say anything else. It's a union county, largely centered on the hub of Great Falls. Lewis and Clark County is where Helena is. It's finally all in, but Tester won that one, and last night I think there were a few out. The other two that were still holding back, and as a matter of fact, they are still holding back. They show only about half the precincts reported. Can you believe this? It's a day later. I mean, get over it. Count the votes and turn them in. The other two big counties that are meaningful are Missoula County, which is where the University of Montana is, and the city of Missoula. It's always been a pretty liberal bastion, a liberal hangout. Tester had a 12,000 vote, almost a 30% vote margin. So out of 36,000, he gained 11,000 votes, 12,000 votes. So it's almost 2 to 1. But there, it looks to me like there are another maybe 6,000 or 8,000 votes left out, which means that Tester gains a couple thousand more votes in Missoula County. And the other one, which used to be when I went to school there 8,000 years ago is Gallatin County. And at the time when I went there, Bozeman was about the same size as the college, and it was almost a John Birch County. It was an ultra right-wing county with a cow college background, an agriculturally oriented conservative college. All of the conservative farm and ranchers felt safe sending their kids to Bozeman because it was a conservative place to go. Your kids are safe, right? Don't smoke pot over there in Missoula and put up with all those liberals. But if you go to Bozeman, you might come out of there still okay, right? Well, Bozeman has since had an influx of out-of-staters and has gone from a county of, I don't know, 10 or 12,000 people now to 100-odd thousand people. The vote count is, maybe it's not 100,000, but it's a lot. It's 60, 70,000 anyway. Bozeman has the busiest airport in the state. It's near Big Sky, which is the ski resort, and the center. It's also close to Yellowstone Park, and so it gets lots of tourist traffic. And the result is, maybe I'm telling you more than you want to know, the result is that it has moved very much more on the liberal side, and the ratio, there's about a 25 point benefit to the Democrat in this setting, and that works out to be another couple thousand votes that are still hanging out. So now, as the count is, there are about 4,000 votes and change, 4,200 votes change, that Tester has now moved up. I think Tester's going to end up winning this by a little more than 10,000 votes, and that's 10,000 votes out of 450,000. So it was close, and this, again, you know, this is a guy going for his third term in the Senate in a midterm year. This would have been the year to take him out. And Jon Tester, it looks to me like he's going to hold. So what do we end up with in the Senate? Well, we end up with, I think, Florida flips and goes Republican. Missouri goes Republican. North Dakota goes Republican. Indiana goes Republican. Montana holds Democratic. I think Arizona holds Republican. And Nevada flips Democrat. So the Democrats gain Nevada and the Republicans gain, it looks to me like Florida, North Dakota, Missouri, and Indiana. So there's a 3 Senate margin gain by the Republicans, and it should end up, what do we got here? We should end up with 2 more Republicans out of it, 3 more Republicans out of it. So it should be 53 anyway, 53-47, I think is where we end up. So now let's take a look at the House. And of course the House is a lot more complicated, and I anticipated a whole bunch of things. Silly me. Number one, I anticipated that there would be more downvote benefits, probably with both parties, but that if there was a shift coming in the Senate, that those Senate votes would down ballot vote. And that may have been true, but it may also have been true in Texas more than anywhere else, where Beto, Bedwetter, O'Rourke, the Irish-Mexican, clearly lit a fire in Texas and may have helped pull a couple of his Democrat Congress candidates a little more likely to win in Texas. And as it turns out, and let me go back to that Senate race because I want to follow it. Here he is, Ted Cruz, a former presidential candidate, the number 2 candidate to come out of the 2016 presidential primary race against Trump. He was ahead of everybody except Kasich and lasted out of the 17. He was 16 that popped out. And so you would think that he got a large launch from that presidential election and from his high visibility and lots of exposure. He didn't. And of course, the fact that Trump called him Lying Ted didn't help. There are people in Texas that don't like him very well. He's about as charismatic as Snidely Whiplash. I think he's going to be a fairly good ally of Trump's, so I should leave him alone, right? But Beto, being tall, lanky, charismatic, unassuming, a young guy, clearly pulled some Hispanic Americans and younger people and the more liberal side and the border counties. And he's from, I think, El Paso, and he clearly carried it and carried it real well. And so he came within 220,000 votes, 210,000 votes of nailing Ted Cruz, a veteran and incumbent Republican in a Republican and right-leaning, marginally right-leaning state. And it shows a couple of things. First of all, the vulnerability of Ted Cruz. Secondly, it's a midterm, which weakens the incumbent, the presidential party side to some extent, puts them at risk. And third, it shows that there is a trend more Democratic even in places like Texas. And you can see that in Houston, Dallas, El Paso, San Antonio, and of course the south end of the state where it's turned more Democratic. But Cruz managed to hold on by a narrow margin. And it maybe did not pull Texas House District 23, where Will Hurd looks like he won. He's leading by, this is the Southwest, basically the whole border county, or the whole border district along the Rio Grande, all the way along the Texas border for most of that border. And he is leading by 700 votes. 100% of the precincts supposedly reporting, but 700 votes out of 200,000 votes. So it is not a county that leaned very hard, and it has not been declared, and it is very close. So whether or not Hurd holds is another matter, but very, very close. You've got the main district, the primary main district. I think it is the incumbent Bruce Poliquin, who is holding by a 0.02% margin. So the vote there is, it is, they voted 140,000 or 240,000 people voted in Maine, and the difference between the two of them is 52 votes. 52 votes. The independent or libertarian polled almost 15,000 votes. So anything that switched there will switch the outcome. But we're talking about 50 votes out of 250,000. That is an amazingly tight situation. There's a southern Minnesota district. Jim Hagedorn, I think he's the incumbent. He's leading by less than half a point. That one is 1,500 difference. Very, very close out of a couple 100,000 votes. Southwest Washington, Bootler, I'm going to get it wrong, Boutlier, Jaime, anyway, is leading by 10,000 votes. That'll probably hold, but they're only 71% of the precincts in. So I guess that's hard to tell. The count that I get right now, according to MSN, is 220 Democrats, 195 Republicans. That is almost 100% flip. There were 195 Democrats in the last Congress. There are about a dozen House seats still, a Republican-leaning House seat still out, and about 5 or 6 Democratic House seats still leaning out, so the math does not work. This should show there are 10 seats still out, and it looks more like 15 are what they're holding, but they've obviously counted some on one side or the other. It could be that the Republicans get somewhere between 200 and 205 total, and the Democrats between 230 and 235, which would be close to a 35 to 38 seat margin. Now, why is that 35 to 38 seat margin of interest? Well, because the liberal rag internet public poll outfit called 538, Nate Silver, had it figured at, I think, 38 or 39 flips. Now, he only had a half flip figured in the Republican side for the Senate, and so he was clearly wrong there. He was off by about 3, which is a huge margin for flips there. So he was totally off, but in the Democratic side, he was just about right on. Now, what else did I follow? Well, I followed the early voting. I followed the offset in early voting and both absentee and early ballot turn-ins in those major states that looked like there was a lot of interest, a lot of impetus, a lot of energy, and I looked primarily, of course, at the Senate. But I looked at those early ballots and looked at the disparity between the Republicans and Democrats. One of the guys that I followed, of course, is Larry Schweikert. And Larry Schweikert says that, he was saying that he was fairly certain that those, at least over the last 2 weeks, that those races would tilt more Republican because there was lots more early ballot going on, and that was true in Florida. It was true in Indiana where it helped some. It was true in other states. Arizona looked like it was 60 to 90,000 more Republicans in early balloting than had happened before. And that would have shifted that McSally-Sinema race by another 50 or 60,000 votes, and should have shifted the predictability about that Senate race. That is, McSally, the Republican, versus Sinema, the Democrat, should have shifted that significantly, and it didn't. I mean, it is really, really knife edge close. So the upshot of it is that we have a Republican Senate, which is more Republican, and a Democratic House that is totally flipped, and which means that all of the House chairmen, the 9 or 10 big House chairmen, including Dianne Feinstein, what's his name, the little fat guy from New York, I shouldn't pick on him, I'll think of his name. You've got Maxine Waters, you've got Adam Schiff in intelligence. You have some really off-center people that I think need medication that are going to be the chairpersons of a bunch of those committees, and it could be pretty spooky to be there. We know that there are going to be immediate investigations. There's going to be support for Mueller, and there are going to be people that do hearings. They're going to try to get Mueller in. They're going to try to get him to say that he's gaining on it and that there's more to do. They're going to be more supportive of him if Mueller gets fired. They are going to have hearings, and that is going to cause the immediate hue and cry for impeachment in a much worse fashion than it would have been if Trump was going to fire Mueller. It would have been a good time to do it before this election, long before this election, so it didn't impact the election. But so it will be worse now. There's no question about it. The intelligence stuff, I mean, Adam Schiff, there is no darker guy than Adam Schiff. I think he is in the running for one of the darkest ones of all, certainly on the Democratic side. He is a Hillary chum. He runs with the bad ones, and he has been a very high